Hello everyone, and this is BioPhoenix here, and surprise surprise, we're taking a look at another PS1 game, and that happens to be Ling Rise. So the game was released in 1999, and it was developed by Atelier Double and published by Epoch. And in case you never heard of the company Atelier Double, well, it's understandable, and no, they did not make the Atelier games, although that would have been funny. So two random games that they put out that did come out to North America, and are somewhat well known, at least well known enough, and that happens to be the Inuyasha game on PS2, The Secret of the Cursed Mask, and then they also put out a GameCube game called Disney Sports Skateboarding, because yeah. But as for this game, this happens to be an action platformer with some light RPG elements, which I thought was very fascinating and cool to learn about. In fact, I did briefly mention this game in one of my many parts of games I wish got fan translated. And I decided to cover it now, as I realized that the game was actually a lot more playable without knowing Japanese. It's really just one part of the beginning that was a little tricky, but I'll talk more about that later. But for now, let's just talk about the game's story. So the main character of this game happens to be named Ginball, or maybe it's Jimball, I don't know. Well, he definitely does look like a thief class from an RPG game. But anyways, he happens to have a little creature with him called a Ling. Yeah, that's where the name comes from. And he is on his quest to go find the Ling Master. But before he can do that, he does get stalked by a girl who wants to hire him as a bodyguard, and at first he's like, no, I don't want to do that shit. But then eventually he breaks down and is like, okay, fine, I'll do it. And from there, that's pretty much how he gets involved with the whole drama with the town and how that there's an evil dictator trying to take over everything. And yeah, that's the gist of it. It's pretty run-of-the-mill story. And for a game like this, it's fine, it's whatever. Then again, whenever I play an action platformer, I don't go into it expecting, like, the Godfather level writing. So with that out of the way, let's get talking about the gameplay itself, and as you can see, yeah, it definitely looks very similar to Crash Bandicoot. But it's not quite the same, as it does have a pretty interesting gimmick going for it. So in this game, you don't jump on the enemies. Instead, you attack them by using your Lings, and you can have two of them equipped. So at first, your Lings are only able to punch, so you just gotta jump around and just beat them up. But whenever you go to the Ling store, yeah, the Ling store, you know, the place that has your Ling and Ling accessories. So these stores not only allow you to buy items for yourself and for the many different Lings, but it's also the place where you get to level them up and can also buy them skills, because yes, you don't level them up just by like attacking the enemies and gaining EXP. All the money you've collected is what goes into the EXP. Now before I move on, one funny thing I do want to mention about the Ling store that really made me laugh was that when you try to buy a new skill at the store and your Ling can't learn the move yet, you want to know what the shopkeeper tells you, and granted, the translation of this could be very well off, but the fact that it came up the way it did was still funny as hell. So they say, sorry, your Ling is too stupid to learn this trick. Like, what the fuck? Like, how rude is that? Like, first of all, fuck you for hurting my poor little Ling's feelings, and second of all, why do they have to be so harsh about it? Like, can you imagine if Pokemon gave you a TM to the wrong Pokemon and it tells you, sorry, your Pokemon is the biggest fucking moron to learn this move? Like, goddamn, whether that's accurate or not, that is just so damn funny, and if someone ever were to fan translate this game, please leave that line the way it is. I just think it's just way more funnier that way. So yeah, that's my whole tangent about the Ling store, but there's also an inn too, where you get to rest and you get to save your game. Pretty typical RPG stuff, right? But as for the overall world design and exploration, so the game for the most part is very linear, but yet you can still go back and forth between many different areas, but I wouldn't want to call it an open world game, because all the platforming stages are interconnected to each other and are divided up between different towns that you go to. So that means if you want to go back to a town, then you're pretty much playing a platforming stage in reverse. It's kinda neat. Now before we get moving on, I do want to mention one helpful tip that can help you out at the beginning of the game. For like I said, there was one part that was a little bit tricky to figure out where you're supposed to go, even when translating the dialogue. So after doing everything that you can possibly do in the first town, you're actually supposed to meet up with some old guy, but then you're like, well, where the hell is he? You exhaust everywhere that you can possibly think of, and you just can't find him. Well, turns out is that his house is just outside the beginning town, but it's in a spot off the side of the path that is very easy to miss. And weirdly enough, this is the only part of the game that was like really weird like that. Every other part in this game was very straightforward, even without knowing Japanese, so there you go. That's some little helpful tip that I can give for anyone that wants to play this game. Now let's get moving on and start talking about the game's controls. And the controls in this game, I do think are pretty decent for what they are. X is to talk to people, triangle is for your inventory, and jumping is either circle or square. Not sure why they made two of them, but hey, I guess if you just got tired of pressing circle, you can change it up by pressing square instead. And R1 and L1 allow you to use your lings as attacks, and then L2 and R2 allows you to change up your lings on the fly. So it's a pretty good control layout, but how do they feel? The overall moving and jumping, I do think is pretty good. I don't have any major complaints with it. But I do think that attacking with your lings does feel a little bit on the slower side, and it did take me a little bit to get the hang of the flow and movement of it, but other than that, I really don't think the controls in this game are really that bad at all. So now, let's get moving on and start talking about the other things, like the graphics. And the graphics in this game are very nice and bright and colorful. So not only do I like the overall art style and art direction for the game, and I like the little Ling designs, they're, very cutesy like a Pokemon, but the character designs I do think are a little bit on the funky side, but I do think it does have its charm. But the level varieties are really nice, as you got some pretty cool looking settings, and I do think they do look good for this type of game. And I have to give them some credit for the interior designs that they did for the houses in this game. Now sure, there are some that are recycled, but there is at least a few cool little details that I did like seeing. And speaking of houses, one town that I really like the look of in this game is the tower one, where all the houses and the shops are all surrounded in a spiral across a tower. I thought that was just a really cool idea. So yeah, overall, I do think this is a really nice looking PS1 game for the year 1999, with its very nice bright colors and cool aesthetics. And yeah, I could see some people not being crazy about some of the character designs in this game, but I kinda like it for how funky and weird it is. So now, as for the game's music, the music in this game is actually pretty damn good. There's a couple songs throughout the stages that do remind me of the game Klonoa, and there's a couple songs that kind of have that industrial sound to it, and in particular, there is a couple tracks that do have that typical 90s drum and bass sound, which, was very popular at the time. And I personally do like some of those tracks, but definitely my favorite song in the whole game happens to be the boss music. Yeah, the boss music kind of has that really intense fighting game sound to it. In fact, there is a sound in there that almost does remind me of an N64 game called Fighter's Destiny. Now say what you will about the game, but the soundtrack for that game was really awesome and very underrated. So the fact that there's a song in here that does remind me of it a little bit is a good thing. But as much as I do like a lot of these tracks though, I will admit and say that obviously not every song is a winner. There is a couple songs that are a little bit on the forgettable side, but are by no means bad. But it's still a very good soundtrack overall that not only fits the game, but even listening to it outside of the game, it still has a good amount of enjoyable tracks to listen to. Now if you wanted to go out and buy yourself a copy of this game, well, the cheapest I've seen it for was $88, and the highest I've seen it for was about $150. Okay, well actually the highest I've seen it for was like over $300, but fuck that one. So yeah, it's no big surprise that this is not a cheap game, though I did expect this one to be a lot higher than that. But even for those prices though, I still think it's too much for a game that you can beat in less than 5 hours. So now, as for my overall thoughts on Ling-a-Bling Rise is that this is a game that I'm very close to liking it, but unfortunately there is a few things that do fall short, and I will get into them right now. So the main gimmick of this game is using these lings and attacking people, right? Well, I personally found that using these lings does make playing through this game a little bit annoying to play through, not just because you gotta constantly jump around the enemy and constantly attacking them, but also there is a lot of maintenance going on with them. So the one thing I haven't explained yet is the bar underneath. So that is their stamina bar, and every time you attack, it goes down a little bit. And the only way to gain it back up is by either using some items or going to the inn to sleep. Now I could see a lot of people not liking that aspect whatsoever, and as for me, it's slightly annoying, but I don't downright despise it though. but the one meter that I don't like is the other one. So yes, there is another meter in this game for your Lings, but you don't see them as you're playing the game. You can only see it during the status screen. See this top meter right here? What you have to do is that you have to make sure this thing is in the middle as possible. I thought you had to either make it go left or right, but no, you have to keep it in the middle as possible, because if either goes left or right, then your Ling is going to refuse to attack, and it's always very inconsistent too, so it's pretty damn annoying that you have to manage this on top of the stamina as well. And the worst part about it too is that when you sleep at the inn, yeah, it doesn't reset back in the middle, so the only way to keep it in the middle is you have to buy a shit ton of items for every single Ling that either gains it up or gains it down. So yeah, that whole aspect about it, I think was a little bit too much for this game. Now, like I said, if this was a game where you only had to deal with the Ling stamina meter, I think it would be way more tolerable. And even without all this, just attacking with the Lings, I do feel like it's just not really my most favorite feeling ever for an action platformer, but I understand that they wanted to do something a little bit different because, you know, if this was a game where you just jump around on enemies, then it would just be like every other game ever made. And another thing about the attacking that I'm not the craziest about is that whenever you level up your Ling's physical attack, I feel like they don't do that much damage than they did before. I mean, obviously they do a little bit more, but not a lot. And I feel like that most enemies still feel like they take a decent amount of hits just to kill them with the basic punching move. Now, obviously, you can get some of the other more powerful skills that can kill enemies very quickly, but they're going to take up a ton of SP, and of course that requires you to use up more items, and yeah, like I said, it's a little bit annoying. With all that being said though, I don't want to say this is a bad game, because I do think there is a lot of other good stuff going for it, but I do think that whole aspect with the Lings and their management shit, I do feel like that kind of brings it down to make me say that it's kind of mediocre, because it's not an unplayable game. I just think that the whole gimmick of this game could have been thought out a lot better. And like I mentioned before, this game is very short, and I feel like that you really don't get much time to work with the whole RPG aspect about it because it's just so very minimal in this game. Like, by the time you manage to buy up a bunch of skills for your Lings, you're pretty much already done the game by that point. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't love this game as much as I wanted it to, and I don't hate it either. I actually think it's mediocre, but it is playable, with some a little annoying things here and there. But despite me saying that it's a mediocre game, it actually wasn't boring, and I also found it to be pretty fascinating to play through, and, well, I guess the one good thing about it being short is that at least the game didn't feel like a drag to play through. So yeah, not a very easy game to recommend, but if you do like the idea of a Crash Bandicoot platformer where you go to towns and you buy items, and of course instead of spinning into boxes, you instead throw cute little animals at them, then I do think it's at least worth trying out just to see if you like it, because I don't know, maybe I am being a little bit too harsh. But even with the things that I do like about this game though, I still don't think it's nearly as good as any of the 3 Crash Bandicoot games on PS1. And like I always say, I don't think all of these obscure games need to be, like, as good or better than some of these, like, well-known games that we all know and love. But the thing is, this is a game that had a lot of potential, and I did really want to like it, but unfortunately, it fell short for me. So with that being said, thanks for watching and commenting, and have yourselves a great day.
My Ling is rising.